and welcome to Relationships and Astrology. And this is our recording on the moon. And the moon is the full moon in Virgo. And I'm Margaret Gray in Dublin.
And I'm Armand Diaz in New York.
So this is quite an interesting full moon, isn't it, Armand? I mean, it makes quite a few aspects. I mean, what are your initial thoughts about this full moon in Virgo opposite the sun in Pisces?
Well, full moons, we're talking about times when things get amplified, things get maybe a little bit blown out of proportion. Although, we've been through more than a month of eclipses, and it may or may not be up to what we've been through lately. But full moons, they can be very charged times when people can get a little bit overexcited about things. And yet it's in the sign of Virgo, which has a somewhat reserved energy. And Saturn is all over this full moon, squaring from Sagittarius. So, I mean, my sense of things is that we may get lost in the details a little bit.
So true. And it's also interesting because we're talking about emotions. And as you said, emotions getting amplified with the full moon. And we know that, it's the tides change. So the water in our body, the emotions in our body change. And this Virgo is very much kind of the earthy realm. So it's about the planet. It's about our body. It's about the physical realm. It's also a very practical realm. So it's interesting in terms of relationships, because I think whenever Virgo is highlighted, it brings up the kind of themes of being of service for each other, helping each other, but also that Virgo is ruled by Mercury, and it's that very analytical part of Mercury that dissects things. So I'm really wondering if we're going to be doing some dissecting around relationships, particularly since Venus is still retrograde during the full moon.
It could be, the excitement of the full moon, that sort of raciness that comes, and then that Virgoan emphasis on the details and analysis. It could be, it could be a little bit dry and unemotional in its own way, although the sun is in Pisces and arguing for the emotional viewpoint, as is Mercury. But I do wonder if it is going to be, if we're not going to maybe think about relationship and analyze relationship and not necessarily feel our way through it.
Yes, maybe trying to understand past relationships, current relationships, what led to them, what do we actually want in a relationship, why do we behave, why did we behave in that way with that person at that time? So really that flavor of kind of, cutting it apart and looking at it in more detail, I think is quite important. And maybe also looking at patterns. What are our patterns in relationships? Which, of course, is very useful and helpful as long as we don't go into that self-critical arena of Virgo of kind of like, what did I do wrong? And why didn't I do this way or that way? So I'm hoping that the opposition to the sun in Pisces will really lend some compassion, to the analytical side of Virgo.
Well, it's good to be careful that we're not self-critical. It's also good not to be critical of the other, to be overly critical of the partner as well. And I think this, the square to Saturn, the moon square Saturn, just a couple of hours after, I think that, there could be a real drive to get to the bottom line on things. We've been talking the last couple of weeks about how there is such a truth. What is the truth of things? And I think we can perhaps get towards the bottom line on things. We can perhaps get to an understanding, but I just would caution people not to be too cut and dry about it. It may be a little too easy to be just kind of looking at the facts and sort of making a list here and a list there and seeing which has more and then making your decision. And, that's really not the most productive way to deal with emotional things. Also, though, I just wanted to add in that you're right about, thinking about relationship patterns, because after all, Venus is retrograde. So
Yes, so we're really looking at that. Back to, I think the opposition to the sun, which is conjunct Chiron in Pisces. So there is the potential, I think, for some forgiveness. And I think that's maybe one of the themes, looking at kind of themes of reconciliation, forgiveness, and unconditional love, because ultimately that's really where forgiveness lies. And when I was thinking about this full moon, I was thinking of the Hawaiian Ho'oponopono chant, I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, and thank you, which, the book Zero Limits, which was by Joe Vitale, talks about how a psychiatrist actually healed a whole ward of mental health patients by chanting that chant repeatedly. And I think it's just points us towards, sort of an avenue towards forgiveness and reconciliation, which is really based on unconditional love, which is about grace, which, we can't really manifest without those ingredients. So maybe the potential is also there that, at the end of all the analysis, we might actually just be able to let it all go and say, actually, there's a point at which we can let it go and just forgive, and for ourselves and for others, and move on.
I would say that the Saturn and Virgo emphasis can do two things. On the one hand, it can build up a wall, and a rather dry wall, that can make those processes that you're talking about virtually impossible. On the other hand, they can provide a container in which you can do these things and feel safe, and feel that, that you are respecting the boundaries of yourself and other, and are able to work with that sort of Piscean Chiron energy. It requires, as always, requires a conscious choice, and on top of that, an ongoing commitment to the process.
Yes, and the key, of course, always back to consciousness, isn't it? That consciousness and that ability and that willingness to be vulnerable, because the Pisces energy requires really a degree of vulnerability. Otherwise, as you say, it can also close off and it can freeze. Pisces energy can freeze if it feels too vulnerable, of course. Now, also just to say that this full moon is quincunx Uranus in Aries. So I think it also kind of plants some possibility of new seeds, of something new, of some excitement, some kind of light at the end of the tunnel, because we've really been swamped a lot with a lot of Piscean energy. So it's been kind of hard to see through the fog recently.
Yeah, that may come in an unexpected way. Of course, we're talking about Uranus and Aries and quincunx. Not the thing that you were seeing happening. Perhaps something that you were not expecting, in a way that you were not expecting it to happen.
And of course, finally, the trine to Pluto and Capricorn, which is still more of kind of really cleaning out, our relationship foundations. And I think that's what's been, even though it hasn't been an easy process, but I think the last few years is cleaning out all that old stuff that lies beneath, that kind of really acts as an obstacle to any relationship. So the more we clear that out, the more it's really beneficial for current relationships, future relationships, and also to heal past relationships.
I would certainly say that's some of the best potential of this full moon. It's on a weekend. I would just, on a much more mundane note, I would say that, full moons are generally fun times, outgoing, maybe.
Yeah, it depends. It depends how you feel, but certainly a good time to be out in nature, since it's a Virgo full moon. So, and again, that can act as a container. So we'll see you again at the next new moon then, Armand.
See you then, Margaret.
Take care. Bye-bye.